So this is a review for Young and Healthy, released in 1933, it's the 51st in the series, and it's directed by Rudolph Ising. You can currently find this beautiful new restoration on HBO Max. So in case you haven't seen this one before, as it is under copyright, so I can't show you the full cartoon here, but essentially we go into a painting and we see a king is very bored being a king, so he ends up discovering that young people seem to have more fun and has fun with young people, and that's pretty much it.
Come on, kids. I'm young and healthy. Hey.
So what you're going to see is, first of all, a re-edit of the original audio commentary I did provide to take it down from the channel. You'll then hear some new thoughts from me, and then you'll hear some thoughts from the toony tenor, my good friend Manny Cruz, who's going to discuss the music in this cartoon. So grab some popcorn and enjoy. I like the opening, how we're just looking at basically events from inside a painting. It's pretty good, and I do like this opening, how they're trying to make it as grand as possible. You know, with this staircase. It's a pretty nifty looking animation here, I have to say. What's with those knights, like ghosts in there or something? I love the design here of King Louis and the way he moves. Like, it's just basically modeled around this giant ball. I like this gag here when they both bend down to bow to the. I was half expecting those pantaloons, those buttons, to be dislodged. Is it wrong of me to say I'm finding that the way her butt is animated to be the funniest thing here? It does take a little bit of time to truly get going. I mean, essentially, all it is, you know, is grumpy, is unhappy, and he sees a lot of kids, and, you know, he wants to relive his youth again, and then it just ends abruptly. But there's a lot of characters here, because, I mean, in a lot of the later Looney Tunes, you know, for budgetary reasons, they didn't have massive crowds, and when they did, they usually would do it stylized, but they wouldn't do anything like this. But at least here, all they have to do is just animate one cycle, and then they just repeat it over and over, and then, you know, and that works. But yeah, a lot of the later ones just wouldn't have that kind of a crowd shots. Kind of reminds me of me. I'm not a fan of big balls and parties and, you know, things like that. What an absolute sourpuss. I mean, I'm recording this a few days before my 35th birthday, so I'm still relatively young, but...
Yeah, that's what you think.
Yes, Blue. You'll get old too, and you'll regret what you just said, but those were my original thoughts anyway at the time. So one reference I wanted to bring up is the Jimmy Durante reference. He was already discussed in detail in the review for Bosco in Person, so if you want to know more about Jimmy Durante, definitely give that video a watch. When I first did the commentary, I was using a very worn out, I guess, VHS quality picture, but now we've got a beautiful new restoration, and I gotta say it looks really, really good, especially with the background details. They actually put in a lot of work, and you can only see that sort of thing in a beautiful restoration like this. It's amazing. And I still maintain, like I said in the commentary, these designs are really, really good, especially with the king and having the ball and walking on that ball. I'm wondering if the animators were actually deciding to take the cues from Disney, studying what they were doing at the time, because, you know, Disney working at the time, basically, and this is roughly around when Popeye was starting to come out too, so it was pretty much Disney that they would be following. But I love the character designs in this one. And now to discuss the music in this short, along with giving his own thoughts on it, is my good friend Manny Cruz, the toony tenor himself. Be sure to follow him on Instagram and the other socials. So take it away, Manny.
Hello everyone, this is Manny Cruz, the toony tenor, coming at you for some information and Manny's music time for the 1933 Merry Melody, Young and Healthy, directed by Rudolph Ising. Just some quick thoughts about the cartoon itself. I last saw the cartoon in 2018 in a very old, ugly faded copy, but fortunately, I got to see an HD restoration of it, and it looks a lot better. The cartoon itself, I mean, again, nothing really to write home about. Some of the animation looks kind of interesting. Some of the noticeable changes in the animator's style. Some of them are a little bit more grotesque, and some are a little bit more simplistic. But just, overall, the plot, a king wants to be young and healthy again. I mean, I'm pretty healthy for the most part, and I guess I'm young. I'm in my mid 30s, give or take. But again, nothing really to write home about. The music's charming, and overall, I give it 5 out of 10. So, like I said, typical of the merry melodies and Looney Tunes at this time period. Now, I want to talk about the title song itself, and my goodness, do I have quite a lot of information to give you. So, first off, the song Young and Healthy was written by Harry Warren, and the lyrics were composed by Al Dubin. Warren and Dubin are a prominent duo in the history of American popular music, and the duo will continue to appear in later Looney Tune and Merry Melody cartoons, a lot of them. If you'd like to learn more about Harry Warren, please listen to the video about a great big bunch of you that Anthony and I recorded a while back. So, for the title song, it was first recorded and released by Victor Records in late 1932, featuring Waring's Pennsylvanians. The song was featured in the 1933 Busby Berkeley musical film 42nd Street, with Dick Powell performing the song in the film. Now, initially, I was going to talk about Al Dubin, since I already covered Harry Warren, and talk a little bit about some of the other incidental songs that you hear in the background. For example, you hear Am I Blue prominently featured in the scene with King being sad that the Jimmy Durante puppet no longer worked, or Jack in the Box, I should say. But when I looked into Fred Waring in particular, I was like, my goodness, there's a ton of information to talk about this guy, and I want to dig into it. So once again, the first commercial recording of this song was from Fred Waring and his Pennsylvanians. So you're probably asking, who is Fred Waring? This guy was the definition of a Renaissance man. Frederick Malcolm Waring Sr. was born in Tyrone, Pennsylvania, on June 9th, 1900. His mother would rehearse a local choir at their family home, so he grew up in somewhat of a musical environment. And even at the age of 16, he would conduct his groups with his mother's curtain rod. It's a little bit more cumbersome to wield than a baton, but hey, if it works, it works. So the following information, I want to give a lot of credit to the library of Penn State University, where Fred Waring attended, and has a ton of information about his career, and I want to give them a lot of credit, as well as looking up the New York Times archive. So the following information comes from the section called Fred Waring's America, and I quote, "He made his first stage appearance at age 5, and at age 12 became the leader of his hometown's Boy Scout fife and drum corps. As a teenager in 1917, Waring and his neighborhood friend Freddie Buck joined the Waring McClintock Snap Orchestra, formed by Waring's younger brother Tom and drummer Polly McClintock, and the quartet began to perform at local dances. Polly McClintock would be famous for having a very frog-like voice. He kind of sounds like Popeye a little bit. So once again, I quote, "When the Guy Hall Band, an African-American jazz band from Columbus, Ohio, visited Tyrone, Hall's banjo and vocal sounds inspired the group to combine banjos, a jazz orchestra, and glee club style vocals. Now known as Waring's Banjo Orchestra, they became distinctive as a singing band, not just one that featured a vocal solo or chorus once in a while, performed on their instruments and sang almost all their numbers. They started using some unusual visual effects to make their performances more interesting, and continued performing for fraternity parties, proms, and dances," unquote. So think of him as like an early version of a rock band, I don't know, kind of like Pink Floyd or some other groups that just went crazy with the theatrics. Fred Waring would go on to attend Penn State University, where ironically he was rejected by the university's glee club. Waring's ensemble, now renamed Waring's Pennsylvanians, were increasing in popularity, and Waring would no longer serve as a vocalist and banjo player, but would become the ensemble's leader, booking shows for the group. Waring would drop out of Penn State University his senior year to focus on his music career. The Pennsylvanians would find much success in the 1920s, performing throughout the country, and they would sign to Victor Records, where they innovated the recording industry. For example, the 1923 song Sleep, which became a #1 hit for them, was the first popular music record to use a vocal chorus, and the group's 1925 song Collegiate was one of the first to use electronic microphones. The group would also use megaphones and visual effects in their performances, as I've mentioned before. By the end of the 1920s, the Pennsylvanians were one of the biggest groups in vaudeville and would tour internationally and would also work on Broadway. In 1927, Warner Brothers would hire the Pennsylvanians to record short films using Vitaphone, Warner Brothers' early sound to film process, and Vitaphone, that word would be familiar to us people who are fans of the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. In the 1930s, Fred Waring was a rock star of his day, and he would later transition into radio along with still performing live shows. Once again, I quote from the website. But while filming the 1937 film Varsity Show at Pomona College in California, Waring went to hear a concert by the college's Glee Club and was very impressed by its student conductor, Robert Shaw. Up until this point, all the Glee Club singing in the Pennsylvanians was done by the instrumentalists. But after seeing Robert Shaw's impressive conducting of the Pomona College Glee Club, Waring realized that it was time for him to perform a professional Glee Club with trained singers. So he hired Shaw to help him organize and train a separate glee club, changing the sounds of the Pennsylvanians forever, unquote. So, in my experiences, as I've stated before, I have a bachelor's and master's degree in music, and I have a decent amount of experience in choral singing, choral conducting. I've never met Robert Shaw. He died 10 years before I was born in 1978. But some of my teachers in undergrad were either directly influenced by Robert Shaw or worked with people who worked with Robert Shaw, and a lot of his singing techniques and choral techniques are still implemented to this day, whether it's in a glee club or university choir, church choir, opera choir, you name it. You hear Robert Shaw, his name is, like I said, he's one of the legends of our field. Waring would later organize week-long choral workshops starting in 1947, and they lasted 39 years, where choral conductors, music teachers, and others would learn proper vocal technique and pedagogy, along with the ins and outs of the music business. Waring would have his own television show starting in 1949 and lasting until 1954, and the Pennsylvanians were also featured on an early television broadcast from the World's Fair in 1939. Remember how I said that Waring was a Renaissance man? Besides his experiences in music, he was also an inventor and a pioneer in kitchen appliances. I bet you didn't see that one coming. I once again quote from the website. Music was not the only interest of Fred Waring. He was a dreamer with an extremely active mind and had been interested in gadgets since he was a kid. In 1936, a man named Frederick J. Osias showed him an undeveloped and seemingly unworkable device. Osias had talked his way into Waring's dressing room after a radio broadcast and told Waring of his idea for a emulsifying machine for which he had been able to secure a patent in 1933. Waring was intrigued and decided to help him with ideas, money, and marketing. Over the next few months, Waring analyzed and studied Osias's prototype. Unquote. Waring would go on to redesign the device and release it as the Waring Mixer, and it was later known as the Waring Blender in 1937. He would spell blender Blendor as opposed to Blender as it's normally called. The Waring blender would be promoted by Waring, obviously, as well as the Pennsylvanians in performances, and would be ubiquitous in American society, as well as smoothies, which Waring popularized with his blender. And he would do demonstrations. And like I said, he was his own hype man. This is years before huge corporations would literally devote billions of dollars in advertising. Waring and his bandmates and friends and associates would do it for him. Waring lived off the royalties of his device until his death. Now, what's interesting too, and related to animation itself, Waring was a fan of cartoons and comic strips. He would have his secretary cut off comic strips while he was on tour, his favorites, and send in the mail. He would get to check them out. In 1948, due to his love of the industry, he was invited to the National Cartoonist Society, where he would entertain the members of the society for 25 years at the Shawnee Inn Country Club, where they would have their get-togethers. Waring would collect a large collection of comic strips, cartoons, and illustrations throughout his life, from such strips as Prince Valiant, Beetle Bailey, Dick Tracy and Family Circus, and artists like Rube Goldberg, Mort Walker, Walt Kelly of Pogo fame, and Chester Gould. Waring was very popular during the days of the Eisenhower administration of the 1950s, but by the time the 60s came, with the British invasion and with the advent of soul and Motown, rock and roll, all these different things, his style of music with choral singing, lush orchestrations, and melodies fell out of favor by that time. He was still performing up until his death, but like I said, once the 60s rolled around, when the Beatles came and Elvis and rock and roll and all that jazz, he was seen as passé. On December 15th, 1983, President Ronald Reagan presented Fred Waring with the Congressional Gold Medal, which was rarely given to entertainers at that time. He was one of only 5 up to that point that received one. Waring died on July 29th, 1984, where he suffered a stroke after completing a summer of workshops, and he was conducting his last youth concert at his alma mater, Penn State. Wow, that is a ton of information I just gave you, but I had no idea that Fred Waring existed until I was researching this cartoon. I was absolutely fascinated by his life and what he did. And all because, and I found all this because he did the title track for this cartoon. Very nice job, too, if you get a chance to listen to the recording. If you look it up, Waring's Pennsylvanians on YouTube by Victor Records in late 1932. So those are my thoughts, once again, and Manny's music time for today, whatever. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Enjoy and have a nice day. And most importantly, so long, folks.
Wow, who would have thought we would have been discussing kitchen appliances on this channel, but here we are. So thanks, Maddie. That's for my rating for this cartoon. Look, it's one of the better Merry Melodies, but it's okay. It's a bit of fun. I'd say about 6.5 out of 10. Definitely worth watching. But that'll do it for this video. So thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.